He just wanted it to be another ordinary day. But when he noticed the bruises on the Maid, his reaction changed everything. If you enjoy love and romance stories, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of McKenna Construction's main office building in downtown Seattle, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Sarah moved quietly through those shadows, her cleaning cart wheels barely making a sound as she navigated the empty corridors. At 26, she had perfected the art of being invisible, of moving through spaces without drawing attention to herself. She arrived every morning at 5:30, always punctual, always silent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the warming spring weather, she wore a long-sleeved navy shirt that covered her arms completely. The makeup she applied each morning was careful, deliberate, hiding more than it revealed. Sarah had been working at McKenna Construction for 8 months now, and she knew every corner of the building, every office, every hidden spot where dust might gather. She took pride in her work, in the way the surfaces gleamed after she passed through, in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. But more than that, she treasured these early morning hours when the building belonged to her alone, when she could breathe without feeling watched. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city waking up outside, and the soft splash of water in her bucket as she methodically cleaned each surface. These moments of solitude were precious to her, a respite from the tension that seemed to follow her everywhere else. James McKenna usually arrived at the office around 7, but lately he had been coming in earlier. At 42, he had built his construction company from the ground up, transforming it from a small residential contractor into one of Seattle's most respected commercial builders. His success, however, came with a weight he carried silently. 3 years ago, a catastrophic accident at one of his construction sites had changed everything. A building collapse during the renovation of an old warehouse had injured several workers seriously. The investigation had revealed safety violations, forged inspection documents, and a web of corruption that led to a construction supervisor who had disappeared before he could be arrested. The families of the injured workers had sued, and though James had ultimately been cleared of personal wrongdoing, the guilt ate at him daily. Since then, he had become obsessive about safety, about doing things right, about protecting the people who worked for him. It was this hyper-awareness that made him notice the quiet woman who cleaned the offices each morning. The first thing he noticed was how she flinched whenever someone approached her unexpectedly. The second was how she always wore long sleeves, even on the hottest days. The third was the careful way she applied makeup around her left eye on certain mornings, and how she sometimes moved with the cautious gait of someone whose ribs hurt. James had seen enough in his 42 years to recognize the signs. His own sister had gone through something similar in her first marriage before she found the courage to leave. The recognition stirred something protective in him, something that went beyond his role as her employer. On this particular Thursday morning, Sarah was cleaning the conference room on the 3rd floor when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her shoulders tensed automatically and she glanced at the clock. 6:45. Too early for most employees, but lately Mr. McKenna had been arriving earlier. She tried to move a little faster, hoping to finish the room before he reached his office. But as she lifted the heavy glass water pitcher from the conference table, her hands trembled slightly. The pitcher slipped, crashing to the floor in an explosion of glass and water. The sound echoed through the quiet building like a gunshot. Sarah dropped to her knees immediately, frantically trying to gather the larger pieces of glass with her bare hands, panic rising in her chest. She would have to pay for this, and money was already so tight. More than that, she dreaded the confrontation, the anger that would surely follow. "Sarah, are you okay?" James's voice came from the doorway, gentle and concerned rather than angry. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, a small cut on her finger bleeding where she had grabbed a sharp piece of glass. "I'm so sorry, Mr. McKenna. I'll pay for it, I promise. It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Hey," he said softly, stepping carefully around the glass to reach her. "It's just a pitcher. Are you hurt?" The kindness in his voice almost undid her. She was so accustomed to anger, to accusations, to being blamed for every small mistake that his gentle concern felt foreign and overwhelming. "I'm fine," she whispered, though blood was now dripping steadily from her finger. "No, you're not." James pulled out his phone. I'm calling maintenance to clean this up safely, and we need to get that cut looked at. Please, I can handle it myself, Sarah said quickly, scrambling to her feet. I don't want to cause any trouble. As she stood, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of what looked like finger-shaped bruises on her forearm. James noticed, and something cold settled in his stomach. When Sarah realized what he had seen, she quickly pulled her sleeve down, her face flushing with shame. Sarah, James said quietly, when was the last time you had a day off? The question surprised her. I don't need days off. I like working. That's not what I asked. His voice remained gentle, non-threatening. When was the last time you did something just for you? Saw a friend, read a book, took a walk in the park? Sarah stared at him, confusion clear on her face. These were concepts so foreign to her current life that she didn't know how to answer. Her days were carefully regimented. Work at McKenna Construction in the early morning, then home to clean the house and prepare meals, followed by her evening job at the grocery store. Any deviation from this routine meant trouble at home. I should get back to work, she said finally. Not with that cut. James stepped closer, and he noticed how she instinctively stepped back. The first aid kit is in my office. Let me help you bandage that properly. Really, I'm fine. Sarah, his voice was firm but kind, you're bleeding on my conference room carpet. Humor me. Despite her fear, she found herself following him down the hallway to his corner office. The space was warm and inviting, with photographs of construction projects covering the walls and a large window overlooking Elliott Bay. James gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, while he retrieved a comprehensive first aid kit from a cabinet. You're very prepared, Sarah observed, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. Construction sites teach you to be ready for anything, James replied, pulling up a chair beside her. May I? She extended her hand reluctantly, and he began to clean the cut with surprising gentleness. His hands were calloused from years of construction work, but his touch was careful, methodical. How long have you been married? He asked quietly, not looking at her face. The question hit her like a physical blow. Why would you ask that? You wear a wedding ring, but you never mention a husband. Most married people talk about their spouses occasionally, especially when they're working early mornings like this. He applied antibiotic ointment to the cut. I'm guessing he doesn't like you talking about your personal life at work. Sarah's breathing became shallow. He's just private. He doesn't like me bothering people with personal stuff. James wrapped a bandage around her finger with professional efficiency. And he doesn't like you having days off either. I told you I like working. Sarah. James finally looked up at her, his brown eyes serious and kind. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've worked with a lot of people, and I can tell when someone is afraid. The question is, what are you afraid of? For a moment, she looked like she might answer him honestly. Her guard dropped just slightly, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. Then her phone buzzed with a text message, and the wall went back up immediately. She glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. I have to go, she said quickly, standing up. Thank you for the bandage. Sarah, wait. But she was already moving toward the door, gathering her cart with shaking hands. I'll make sure the conference room is perfect tomorrow. I'm sorry about the picture. Sarah, please. The elevator doors closed between them, leaving James alone in his office with more questions than answers. He walked to his window and watched as she emerged from the building 5 minutes later, walking quickly toward the bus stop, with her head down. As she waited for the bus, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. Even from 4 floors up, James could see her shoulders tense as the passenger window rolled down. She approached the car reluctantly, leaning down to speak to whoever was inside. The conversation was brief, but her body language spoke volumes. When she got into the car, it was with the resigned posture of someone who had no choice. James stood at his window long after the car had disappeared into Seattle traffic, his construction worker's instincts telling him that Sarah was in trouble, and his personal experience with his sister's situation telling him that the trouble was probably at home. That evening, he found himself thinking about her as he sat in his own empty house on Queen Anne Hill. His marriage had ended 2 years ago, not from drama or infidelity, but from the slow erosion of 2 people growing apart. Lisa had moved to Portland for her job, and they had divorced amicably, remaining friends who occasionally texted about mutual acquaintances. The house felt too large sometimes, too quiet. James had thrown himself into work after the divorce, building the company larger and more successful than he had ever imagined. But success felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. And lately, he had been questioning what all his achievements meant if he couldn't use them to help the people around him. Sarah's frightened face haunted him as he made himself dinner, as he tried to focus on the evening news, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He had seen that look in his sister's eyes during her darkest days, that combination of fear and resignation, of wanting help but being too terrified to ask for it. The next morning, James arrived at the office at 6, hoping to catch Sarah before she finished her work. But when he reached the conference room, it was already immaculate, every surface gleaming, the carpet spotless where the picture had broken. Sarah was nowhere to be found. He spent the morning distracted, checking the cleaning schedule, asking the building manager about the cleaning crew's hours. Finally, he called the cleaning company directly. "Sarah Mitchell?" The supervisor's voice was slightly puzzled. "She called in sick today. Said she might be out for a few days. Didn't sound good, poor thing. She never misses work, so it must be serious." James thanked the supervisor and hung up, but something about the explanation didn't sit right with him. Sarah had seemed fine yesterday, aside from the cut on her finger and her obvious fear. And there had been something about the way she had left, the urgency in her movements, the terror in her eyes when she looked at her phone. He tried to focus on his work, reviewing blueprints for a new office complex downtown, but his mind kept returning to the image of Sarah getting into that dark sedan, the reluctance in her posture, the way she had moved like someone walking to their execution. By noon, he had made a decision that would change both their lives, though he didn't know it yet. He picked up his phone and called Marcus Rivera, a private investigator he had worked with during the aftermath of the construction site accident. "I need you to look into someone for me," James said, "but I need you to be very, very careful about it." The afternoon stretched ahead of him, filled with meetings and decisions, but his mind was elsewhere. Somewhere in Seattle, Sarah was facing whatever had put that look of terror in her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, James felt like he might be able to do something meaningful with the power and resources he had built. He just hoped he wouldn't be too late. 3 days passed without any sign of Sarah, and James found himself checking his watch constantly, listening for the soft sound of cleaning cart wheels in the early morning corridors. The building felt different without her quiet presence, less welcoming somehow. The replacement cleaner, a cheerful middle-aged woman named Rosa, did good work, but she lacked Sarah's meticulous attention to detail, the way she seemed to understand exactly how things should be. More than that, James couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face when she had looked at her phone that morning, the way all the color had drained from her features, as if she had received news of some terrible catastrophe. Marcus Rivera called on Wednesday afternoon with preliminary information that made James's stomach clench with recognition and dread. "Your cleaning lady is married to a man named David Mitchell," Marcus said without preamble. "But here's the interesting part, James. David Mitchell didn't exist before 4 years ago. No credit history, no employment records, no social media presence. Nothing." James leaned back in his office chair, staring out at Elliott Bay where ferries moved slowly across the grey water. "Someone who doesn't want to be found." "Exactly. I'm still digging, but I found something else that might interest you. The apartment they live in, it's in a complex that's owned by a subsidiary of Hartwell Industries." The name hit James like a physical blow. Hartwell Industries had been the parent company of the construction firm responsible for the warehouse collapse 3 years ago. The same company whose site supervisor, Thomas Hartwell, had disappeared before he could face charges for falsifying safety documents and cutting corners that led to the accident. "Marcus," James said quietly, "what did Thomas Hartwell look like? Let me pull up his old employee records." There was the sound of typing, then a pause. 6'2", brown hair, blue eyes, scar on his left jaw from a childhood accident. "Why? Can you send me his photograph?" "Already in your email." James opened his laptop and clicked on the attachment, though part of him already knew what he would see. The photograph showed a man in his late 30s with cold blue eyes and a calculating smile. Even in the professional headshot, there was something unsettling about his expression, something that suggested he was capable of cruelty. "Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about David Mitchell, but very carefully. If this is who I think it is, he's dangerous. Already on it, James. If Sarah is married to Thomas Hartwell, she's in serious trouble. This man fled the country 3 years ago rather than face charges for criminal negligence. The fact that he's back, using a false identity, means he's got nothing left to lose. After hanging up, James sat in his office as the afternoon light faded, pieces of a horrible puzzle falling into place. The accident that had haunted him for 3 years, the supervisor who had disappeared leaving behind devastated families and unanswered questions, the quiet young woman who flinched at sudden movements and wore long sleeves in warm weather. Sarah wasn't just in an abusive marriage. She was married to the man responsible for the worst day of James's professional life, the man whose criminal negligence had nearly destroyed McKenna Construction and left several workers with permanent injuries. The irony was bitter and perfect. The woman he had felt compelled to protect was married to the man he had spent 3 years wanting to see brought to justice. But whatever Thomas Hartwell had done in the past, it didn't change what he was doing to Sarah now. James picked up his phone and called the cleaning company again. "I'm wondering if you've heard from Sarah Mitchell," he said to the supervisor. "We had some specific cleaning protocols we discussed, and I wanted to make sure she got the message when she comes back." "Actually, Mr. McKenna, I was going to call you. Mrs. Mitchell called this morning and asked if she could come back to work tomorrow. She sounded like she'd been crying, asked specifically if she could start earlier, maybe 5 o'clock instead of 5:30. Did she say anything else?" "She asked if there were any complaints about her work, if anyone had said anything negative. I told her no, of course, she's one of our best people, but she seemed really worried about it." After ending the call, James made a decision that went against every rational thought in his head. He would be at the office at 4:30 the next morning, not to confront Sarah, but to make sure she was safe. To let her know that whatever was happening in her life, she didn't have to face it alone. The next morning, James sat in his darkened office, watching the parking lot through his window. At 4:55, a city bus pulled up to the stop across the street. He watched Sarah get off, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone whose body hurt. Even from 4 floors up, he could see that she was wearing a scarf wrapped around her neck, despite the mild spring morning. He waited until he heard the elevator chime on his floor, then walked quietly to the conference room, where he knew she would start. She was already inside, working methodically, when he appeared in the doorway. "Sarah!" She spun around so quickly, she nearly knocked over her cleaning supplies, her eyes wide with fear before she recognized him. "Mr. McKenna, I didn't expect anyone to be here so early." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. We were worried about you." "I'm fine. Just had a little bug, that's all." But she kept the scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, and James noticed she was favoring her left side when she moved. "Sarah, I want to offer you something, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." She froze, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of her cleaning cart. "I need someone to help with cleaning and light housekeeping at my home," James continued carefully. "It would be additional work separate from your job here, good pay, flexible hours. You could work around your schedule here. I don't think I can take on anything else right now. It would just be a few hours a week to start. My house gets dusty and I travel sometimes for work. Nothing complicated." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The thing is, Sarah, I need someone I can trust completely. Someone discreet, reliable. And frankly, after seeing your work here, I can't imagine trusting anyone else with my home." The word trust seemed to resonate with her. For a moment, her careful mask slipped, and he saw something vulnerable and desperate in her eyes. "I would need to ask my husband," she said quietly. "Of course. But Sarah, this would be your job, your income. You wouldn't need to share the details with anyone if you didn't want to." She looked at him with confusion, as if the concept of having something that belonged solely to her was foreign. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need. In the meantime, I want you to have this." James pulled out a business card and wrote his personal cell phone number on the back. "If you ever need anything at all, you can call me, day or night." Sarah took the card with trembling fingers, staring at it as if it were written in a language she couldn't understand. "Why?" she whispered. "Because everyone deserves to have someone in their corner." The simple statement seemed to break something inside her. Tears welled up in her eyes and she quickly looked away, but not before James saw the profound loneliness there, the desperate hunger for kindness. "I should get back to work," she managed. "Sarah." James's voice was gentle but firm. "Whatever is happening in your life, you don't deserve to be hurt. You know that, right?" She looked at him with such surprise that James realized no one had ever told her that before. The thought made him sick with rage, not at her, but at whoever had convinced this brave, hard-working woman that she deserved pain. "I have to go," she said quickly, gathering her supplies. But this time she didn't run. She finished cleaning the conference room with her usual thoroughness, and when she passed his office an hour later, she gave him a small, hesitant wave. It was progress, James thought. Small, but real. That evening, Marcus called with more disturbing information. "David Mitchell works as a maintenance supervisor for a property management company," Marcus reported. "Same company that manages the apartment complex where he and Sarah live. And James, I found something else. 3 months ago, Sarah Mitchell was treated in the emergency room at Seattle General for a broken rib. The attending physician made notes suggesting domestic violence, but no report was filed. Why not? Because she signed herself out AMA, against medical advice, before they could complete the evaluation. But here's the thing that really bothers me. The apartment complex where they live, it's had several complaints to the city about maintenance issues, faulty wiring, broken security systems. If Thomas Hartwell is working maintenance there, he's probably got access to every unit in the building, including theirs. Including theirs? James, this man has complete control over her environment. He can monitor who comes and goes. He probably controls the utilities, the locks, everything. She's not just trapped in an abusive marriage. She's trapped in a building where her abuser has total authority." James closed his eyes, thinking about Sarah's careful movements, her whispered voice, the way she seemed to expect punishment for every small mistake. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "I did some checking on their marriage certificate. They were married 4 years ago, right after Thomas Hartwell disappeared from Seattle. But Sarah's maiden name was Sarah Elizabeth Warren, and she had a completely different life before she married him." "What kind of life?" "She was a college student, studying social work at the University of Washington. Good grades, active in volunteer work with domestic violence shelters. Her professors remember her as passionate about helping people, especially women in crisis situations. The irony was devastating. Sarah had once dedicated her life to helping women escape abusive relationships, and now she was trapped in one herself, married to a man who had destroyed multiple lives through his criminal negligence. Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about Sarah's life before she married him. Friends, family, anyone who might be able to help her. And I need to know Thomas Hartwell's patterns, his routines, his weaknesses. James, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to give Sarah a way out." The next morning, James arrived at the office to find a note slipped under his door. It was written in Sarah's careful handwriting. "Mr. McKenna, I would like to accept your offer about the housekeeping job. Please let me know when would be convenient to discuss details. Thank you for your kindness, Sarah." At the bottom, in smaller letters, she had added, "I told my husband it was just a few hours on weekends. I hope that's okay." James stared at the note for a long time, understanding the courage it had taken for her to write it, the risk she was taking by accepting help. She had found a way to say yes while protecting herself, creating a story that might keep her safe. He also understood that this was her way of telling him that she was ready to trust him, at least a little bit. It was the beginning of something that could save her life, if he was careful, if he was smart, if he could outthink a man who had already proven himself capable of terrible things. But first, he had to make sure his house was more than just a place for Sarah to work. He had to make it a sanctuary, a place where she could remember who she had been before fear became her constant companion. He had to make it a place where she could begin to believe that escape was possible. James picked up his phone and started making calls. There was a lot of work to do. The first Saturday, Sarah came to James's house on Queen Anne Hill. She stood at the front door for nearly 5 minutes before ringing the bell, her hands shaking as she clutched the address he had written for her. The house was beautiful. A restored craftsman with a wraparound porch and large windows that looked out over Puget Sound. It was the kind of home she had once dreamed of having, back when she still believed in dreams. James opened the door with a warm smile that faltered slightly when he saw her face. The scarf was gone, revealing finger-shaped bruises on her neck that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her left wrist was wrapped in what looked like an elastic bandage. "Sarah, thank you for coming," His voice was carefully controlled, professional, giving no indication that he noticed her injuries. "Come in, let me show you around." The interior of the house took her breath away. It was clean but lived in, comfortable without being ostentatious. Hardwood floors gleamed in the morning light, and the walls were decorated with photographs of construction projects, family gatherings, and scenic views of the Pacific Northwest. It felt like a real home, the kind of place where people laughed and felt safe. "I know it's not much," James said, misreading her silence as disappointment, "but I spend so much time at the office that I don't really have time to keep up with things properly." "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, running her fingers along a bookshelf filled with novels, biographies, and construction manuals. "I haven't seen this many books in years." "You're welcome to borrow any of them," James said. "I'm always buying more than I can read." The offer seemed to surprise her, as if the concept of borrowing something for pleasure was foreign. She pulled her hand back from the books as if she'd been caught touching something forbidden. "What would you like me to focus on?" she asked, slipping back into her professional demeanor. "Honestly, whatever you think needs attention, you have a good eye for these things." James paused, then added casually, "I was thinking maybe just a few hours today, and then I could make us some lunch if you have time, that is." Sarah looked confused. "Lunch? Just sandwiches or something. I thought we could talk about what kind of schedule would work best for you." He was careful to make it sound business-related, professional, giving her a way to accept without feeling like she was accepting charity. She nodded slowly, still uncertain but willing. As Sarah worked, James found excuses to stay nearby. Not to watch her work, but to make sure she felt safe, to let her know she wasn't alone. He noticed how she moved through his space with the same meticulous care she showed at the office, but here, without the pressure of a strict schedule, she seemed to relax slightly. She spent extra time in his kitchen, organizing his spice cabinet with a precision that spoke of someone who found comfort in creating order. When she discovered a small herb garden on his back deck, overgrown and neglected, she looked at him questioningly. "I had good intentions," James said sheepishly, "but I kill everything I try to grow." "These just need a little attention," Sarah said softly, touching the wilted basil plants with gentle fingers. "Some water, some pruning. They're not dead, just forgotten." The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. "Would you like to take care of them?" James asked. "I mean, if you enjoy gardening, I'd be happy to pay extra for plant maintenance." For the first time since he'd known her, Sarah smiled. It was small, tentative, but genuine. "I used to have a garden," she said quietly. "Before." "Before what?" The smile faded immediately, and she looked away. "Before I moved to Seattle." James didn't push, but he filed the information away. Marcus had told him that Sarah had grown up in Spokane, had lived with her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. The grandmother had passed away just before Sarah met Thomas Hartwell, leaving her alone and vulnerable at 22, the perfect target for a predator. They worked in comfortable silence for the rest of the morning, Sarah moving through his house with growing confidence, James catching up on paperwork at his kitchen table while keeping one eye on her. He noticed how she lingered in front of a photograph on his mantel, a picture of James with his sister Lisa and her 2 children at a family barbecue. "Your family?" Sarah asked when she realized he was watching her. "My sister and her kids. This was taken last summer at their house in Portland. They look happy." "They are now. Lisa went through a rough patch a few years back, but she's in a good place now." James chose his words carefully. "Sometimes it takes time to find your way to happiness, but it's possible." Sarah studied the photograph for a long moment, her expression wistful. "Your sister is lucky to have someone who cares about her. Everyone deserves that," James said quietly. When lunchtime came, James made sandwiches while Sarah sat at his kitchen island, looking uncomfortable but trying to hide it. She ate carefully, taking small bites, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to enjoy the food. "Sarah," James said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" She tensed immediately. "I guess. What did you want to be when you were growing up? I mean, what were your dreams before you became an adult and life got complicated?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for so long that James thought she wasn't going to answer. "I wanted to help people," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I thought I could make a difference, you know. There was this counselor at my high school who helped me after my grandmother died. She made me believe that I could take all the pain I'd experienced and use it to help other people going through similar things. That's a beautiful dream. It was stupid. Her voice turned bitter. Turns out I couldn't even help myself. Sarah, that's not... I studied social work in college, she continued, as if the words were pouring out of her against her will. I volunteered at women's shelters, crisis hotlines. I thought I was so smart, so prepared. I knew all the warning signs, all the red flags. I could spot an abuser from across the room. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Except when it came to my own life. James felt his heart breaking for her. How did you meet him? At a coffee shop near campus. I was studying for finals, stressed about everything, and this charming, handsome man started talking to me. He was older, seemed so confident and put together. He told me I was beautiful, that I was smart, that he could see I was special. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I was so lonely after my grandmother died. I thought I'd found someone who really cared about me. He targeted you, James said gently. People like him, they have a gift for finding people who are vulnerable, who need love. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Sarah's voice was fierce with self-recrimination. I knew better. I'd counseled dozens of women in similar situations. I knew the cycle, knew how it worked, but somehow I convinced myself that David was different, that what we had was real. When did you realize it wasn't? Not until after we were married. She took a shaky breath. The first time he grabbed me, he cried afterward, said he was under stress with work, that he'd never hurt me again. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I'd already given up everything for him. Everything? School, my friends, my apartment. He convinced me to drop out of college 6 months before graduation, said I didn't need a degree, that he would take care of me. Then he got a job offer in Seattle, said it was a fresh start for both of us. I didn't know anyone here, didn't have anywhere to go if things went wrong. She looked down at her hands. By the time I realized what I'd gotten myself into, I was completely dependent on him. James wanted to reach across the table and take her hands to tell her that she wasn't alone anymore. But he could see she was barely holding herself together. Instead, he kept his voice calm and steady. How long have you been married? 4 years next month. The words came out like a confession. 4 years of pretending that everything is fine, that I chose this life. 4 years of walking on eggshells, of making myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared completely. But you didn't disappear, James said firmly. You're still here. You're still fighting. Am I? Because most days it doesn't feel like fighting. It feels like surviving, and barely. Surviving is fighting, Sarah. Every day you get up, every day you keep going. That's an act of courage. She looked at him with such surprise, as if the concept of her own courage was completely foreign. I should go, she said suddenly, standing up from the table. David will be home soon, and he doesn't like it when I'm late. Sarah, wait. James stood as well. I want you to know that this job, coming here, it's not conditional on anything. You don't have to tell me about your personal life. You don't have to explain anything to me. This is just a safe place for you to work, to earn your own money, to be yourself for a few hours. What if I don't remember who that is anymore? The question broke James's heart. Then maybe we can figure it out together. As Sarah prepared to leave, James walked her to the front door. On impulse, he pulled a spare key from a drawer in his entry table. I want you to have this, he said, pressing the key into her palm. In case you ever need a place to go, day or night, Sarah. No questions asked. She stared at the key, as if it were made of gold. I can't take this. Yes, you can. Consider it part of the job. Sometimes I travel for work, and I might need you to check on the house, water the plants, that kind of thing. They both knew it was more than that, but the pretense allowed her to accept it. Thank you, she whispered, closing her fingers around the key. After she left, James sat on his porch watching the ferry traffic on Puget Sound and thinking about everything Sarah had told him. She had been a social work student, dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships. Thomas Hartwell hadn't just found a vulnerable young woman to manipulate, he had specifically targeted someone whose compassion and dedication to helping others would make her blame herself for his abuse. The man was even more calculating and cruel than James had imagined. That evening, Marcus called with disturbing news. I've been watching the apartment building where they live, Marcus said. Thomas Hartwell has installed security cameras in the hallways, supposedly as part of his maintenance duties. But James, These cameras are focused on the exits, the mailboxes, anywhere someone might receive outside communication. He's not just controlling Sarah inside their apartment, he's monitoring everyone who might try to contact her. Can we prove that's what he's doing? Not easily. Technically, he has authorization from the property management company, but I also found something else. He's been using his access to other apartments to steal personal information from tenants, identity theft, credit fraud, the works. This man is running multiple criminal enterprises while hiding in plain sight. James felt a chill run down his spine. If he's that paranoid about monitoring Sarah, what happens when he realizes she's working a second job? That's what I'm worried about, James. Men like Thomas Hartwell don't just escalate gradually. When they feel like they're losing control, they explode. That night, James lay awake thinking about Sarah, wondering if she was safe, if she was sleeping or lying awake, listening for footsteps, wondering if giving her the key to his house had put her in more danger. But he also thought about the moment when she had smiled at his herb garden, the way her face had lit up when she talked about helping people, the courage it must have taken for her to trust him enough to share her story. Sarah wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor who was beginning to remember her own strength. And James was determined to help her reclaim the life that Thomas Hartwell had stolen from her. He just hoped they could do it before Hartwell realized what was happening. For 3 weeks, Sarah's Saturday visits to James's house became the brightest spots in her increasingly dark world. She would arrive early in the morning, her face often bearing fresh evidence of Thomas's anger. But as the hours passed, working in the quiet sanctuary of James's home, she would begin to remember pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. The herb garden flourished under her care. She started with the basil and oregano, then gradually expanded to include tomatoes and peppers in small pots. James would find her on his deck in the mornings, her hands covered in soil, a look of peaceful concentration on her face that made her seem years younger. "You have a gift for this," he told her one Saturday, as they shared lunch on the deck, surrounded by the thriving plants. "My grandmother taught me," Sarah replied, gently pinching dead leaves from a tomato plant. "She said that growing things was a way of believing in the future, of having faith that tomorrow would be better than today." Smart woman. She was. I wish I could have been more like her. Sarah's voice grew wistful. She survived so much in her life, but she never let it make her bitter. Even after my parents died, even when she had to take on raising a 12-year-old girl, she never complained. She just endured. "Maybe you're more like her than you think." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "How can you say that?" "Look at my life, James. I'm trapped, scared, completely powerless. Completely. That's not surviving, that's just existing." "Sarah, you get up every morning and face another day in an impossible situation. You work 2 jobs, you take care of everyone around you, and despite everything that's happened, you're still fundamentally kind. You still want to help people. That takes incredible strength." "It doesn't feel like strength. The strongest people rarely do." These conversations were becoming more frequent, more intimate. James found himself looking forward to Sarah's visits, not just because he wanted to help her, but because her presence made his house feel like a home again. Her quiet wisdom, her gentle humor that emerged when she felt safe, her genuine interest in his life and work. All of it reminded him what it felt like to truly connect with another person. But their growing closeness was not going unnoticed. Thomas Hartwell had always been paranoid, but lately his surveillance of Sarah had become obsessive. He monitored her phone constantly, tracked her movements through the building's security cameras, and timed her returns from work with increasing precision. When Sarah began coming home on Saturday afternoons with a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in months, he noticed. "You seem different lately," he said to her one evening, his voice deceptively casual as they sat in their sparse apartment. "More energetic." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "You've been humming in the shower while you're cooking. You haven't hummed in years." "I'm just trying to be more positive, like you always tell me to be." Thomas studied her face for a long moment, his pale blue eyes calculating. "Maybe you're right. Maybe you're finally learning to appreciate what you have instead of always wanting more." But Sarah could see the suspicion in his expression, the way his hands flexed as if he was restraining himself from reaching for her. That night she lay awake listening to him move around the apartment, checking locks, looking out windows, pacing like a caged animal. The next morning, Marcus called James with urgent news. He knows something, Marcus said without preamble. Thomas has been asking questions about the cleaning schedule at your building, wanting to know if any of the staff have been working extra hours or taking on additional assignments. What did you find out? He's also been monitoring Sarah's bank account. The cleaning company pays her by direct deposit every 2 weeks, and he's noticed that her last deposit was larger than usual. James felt sick. He had been paying Sarah in cash for her work at his house, but he had also given the cleaning company a generous bonus for her services at the office, ostensibly for her exceptional attention to detail. Marcus, what do you think he'll do? Men like Thomas Hartwell don't react well to feeling like they're losing control. And James, I found something else. He's been researching you online, looking into your company, your background, your family. He knows who you are. The implications hit James like a physical blow. If Thomas knew about James's connection to the construction accident, if he realized that James was the man who had nearly brought him to justice 3 years ago, then Sarah was in immediate danger. "I'm calling Sarah," James said. "Be careful. If he's monitoring her phone—" "I don't care, I'm not leaving her alone with him." But when James called Sarah's cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. He tried 3 more times with the same result. Finally, he called the apartment's main number and asked to be connected to the Mitchell unit. "Sarah?" James kept his voice professional, businesslike. "Mr. McKenna?" Her voice was barely a whisper, tight with fear. "I wanted to confirm our appointment for tomorrow. Are we still on for 9 o'clock? There was a pause, and he could hear Thomas's voice in the background, asking who was calling. "I'm not sure I can make it tomorrow," Sarah said carefully. "I might be coming down with something." "Sarah, if you need anything—" "I have to go." The line went dead. James immediately called Marcus. "We need to get her out of there, now." "James, we can't just storm into their apartment. We need evidence, a legal reason." "I don't care about evidence. That man is going to hurt her, and I won't let that happen." "Then we need to be smart about this. Give me 2 hours to put together a plan." But they didn't have 2 hours. At 10:30 that night, James's phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the screen, but when he answered, all he could hear was the sound of someone crying. "Sarah? Sarah? Are you there?" "James." Her voice was so broken he barely recognized it. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Where are you?" "He knows about the house, about the money. He knows everything," she was whispering, probably hiding in a bathroom or closet. "He's making calls, talking to people about you. James, he's dangerous, more dangerous than you know." "Sarah, listen to me. Do you still have the key I gave you?" "Yes, I want you to leave. Right now. Get out of the apartment and come to my house." "I can't. He'll find me. He'll—" "Sarah, you cannot stay there. Whatever he's planning, it's not going to get better. You know that." There was a long pause, then the sound of a door slamming somewhere in the apartment. "He's back," Sarah breathed. "I have to—" The line went dead. James was in his car within 5 minutes, driving through the empty Seattle streets toward Sarah's apartment building. He called Marcus on the way, then called 911, reporting a domestic disturbance at the Mitchell apartment. He might not have concrete evidence of what Thomas was planning, but he had enough reason to believe Sarah was in immediate danger. When James arrived at the apartment building, he could see lights on in what he knew was Sarah and Thomas's unit on the 4th floor. Marcus was already there, along with 2 police officers who had responded to the domestic disturbance call. "We can't get in without a complaint from one of the residents," one of the officers explained, "and no one's answering the door." "Then we wait," James said grimly. They didn't have to wait long. At 12:45, the building's fire alarm began blaring and residents started emerging from the stairwells. James scanned every face looking for Sarah, but she wasn't among them. "4th floor," Marcus said urgently. "Look at the 4th floor." James looked up and saw smoke beginning to seep from under a door halfway down the hallway. Thomas's apartment. The fire department arrived within minutes, but by the time they broke down the door, the apartment was fully engulfed. They found Thomas Hartwell unconscious from smoke inhalation, but alive. Sarah was nowhere to be found. "She's not here," the fire chief reported. "We've searched every room." James felt a surge of hope. Maybe Sarah had managed to escape. Maybe she was already safe. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your house, come alone." James showed the message to Marcus, who immediately called for backup. but James was already running back to his car. He found Sarah on his back deck, sitting among her carefully tended plants with her knees drawn up to her chest. She was wearing only a thin nightgown and was shivering in the cool night air. When she saw him, she burst into tears. "Sarah, thank God." James wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and sat beside her on the deck steps. "Are you hurt?" "I set the fire," she said through her sobs. "I waited until he passed out from drinking. Then I knocked over a candle near the curtains. I watched it catch and I ran. Sarah, he was going to make me call you, lure you to the apartment. He had a gun, James. He was going to hurt you because of me, because I brought you into this nightmare." James pulled her closer, feeling her whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror and relief. "It's over now. You're safe." "Is he?" "He's alive. In the hospital, and when he gets out, he's going to prison for a very long time." Sarah looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "How do you know?" "Because Marcus found evidence of all his other crimes. The identity theft, the construction site accident from 3 years ago, everything. The fire just gave us the excuse we needed to search the apartment." "The construction accident?" Sarah pulled back to look at his face. "What construction accident?" James realized that she didn't know, had never known who her husband really was. For the next hour, sitting on his deck, surrounded by the plants she had nurtured back to life, he told her the truth about Thomas Hartwell, about the accident that had haunted James for 3 years, about the investigation that had led them to each other. "So you knew," Sarah said finally. "When you offered me the job, when you helped me, you knew who he was." "I knew who he was. I didn't know who you were." James took her hands in his. "And Sarah, knowing who you are, knowing what you survived, what you've overcome, that changes everything. I don't understand. You're not just a victim who escaped. You're someone who found the strength to save herself and protect someone else in the process. You're someone who, despite everything that was done to you, still chose to be kind, still chose to trust again." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the lights of Seattle spread below them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you get to decide. For the first time in 4 years, you get to choose what your life looks like. I don't even remember how to do that. Then we'll figure it out together, if you want to." Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing not just the man who had saved her, but the man who had trusted her with his own pain, his own guilt, his own need for redemption. "I'd like that," she said quietly. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the garden behind James's house, now officially their house, watching the sun set over Puget Sound. The herb garden had expanded into a full vegetable plot, and she had added flower beds that bloomed in succession throughout the growing season. Thomas Hartwell had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for identity theft, fraud, arson, and his role in the construction site accident. The families of the workers who had been injured finally had their justice, and Sarah had found her freedom. She had also found herself. With James's support, she had returned to school to finish her social work degree. 3 months ago, she had started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter in downtown Seattle, using her own experience to help other women find the courage to leave dangerous situations. It hadn't been easy. There were still days when she woke up expecting to see Thomas standing over her. Still moments when a raised voice or sudden movement made her flinch. But there were also mornings when she woke up next to James and felt nothing but gratitude. Evenings when they worked together in the garden and she remembered what peace felt like. "Dinner's ready," James called from the kitchen door. "Coming," Sarah replied, brushing soil from her hands. As she walked toward the house, she caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her stood straight, smiled easily, had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. She looked like someone who believed in the future, someone who had faith that tomorrow would be better than today. Her grandmother had been right. Growing things was an act of faith, but so was learning to love again, learning to trust, learning to believe that she deserved happiness. Sarah took one last look at her garden, at the evidence of new life growing from what had once been barren ground, then went inside to join the man who had helped her remember how to bloom.